Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and you are all in for such a treat today because we're talking about topics that I know every single one of you listeners already loves, already thinks about, and already wants some strategic answers and insights into. And that is where marketing meets operations, meets AI, meets business growth, meets tangible growth. That's what I'm going to say to tee up today's guest, because this is someone that the more I looked into her work, growth is everywhere. This is someone who loves helping companies grow in so many cool ways. She is laser focused on what actually delivers results. So we're going to learn a lot from her. Let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Cristin Padgett. Cristin is a fractional CMO and the founder of Garde Haus Marketing, which is a strategy-first go-to-market consultancy that partners with early-stage and venture-backed startups. Known for her ability to blend creative storytelling with operational rigor, Cristin builds the marketing engines that drive traction, credibility, and revenue. And I'm going to emphasize engines there. Marketing is something you should build, not necessarily something that you should just do once and get visible once. She's worked across tech, venture, and cybersecurity ecosystems, helping founders transform big ideas into scalable, investor-ready growth systems. We're in for a treat today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Cristin Padgett. All right, Cristin, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's absolutely wonderful to be here.
Heck yes. I'm excited to dive into. You and I were talking a little off the air. You work at such an interesting intersection of a lot of things, all of which lead to business growth. So I'm going to start with you personally. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Cristin? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, so Cristin Padgett. I'm the founder of Garde Haus Marketing, which is, as Brian mentioned, a go-to-market studio, and we focus on helping those early stage companies turn all of their potential into predictable growth. And we do that by combining strategic clarity with operational excellence. And I think that we are looking right now in what's effectively the age of AI, right? And I think that being able to take that and systematize it within what your go-to-market framework looks like is incredibly important. And that is why I ended up founding Garde Haus Marketing, because the idea is that we're pushing the edge and pushing the limits, that sort of avant-garde idea of thought. But then also the house, which is the structure. And I think that, like you mentioned, marketing is an engine and you need to develop the structure around it in order to create a scalable, repeatable engine.
Yeah, I love that overview. I'm going to go right there because I know how many listeners need to hear this type of stuff, Cristin. You use the word repeatable, and obviously that's the beauty of an engine. When we drive a car, that engine, it's just going to keep on running. We can always trust when we get up to 65, it's in whatever gear it is in at that point, and it just keeps on turning over the way that we need it to. From your observation and your vantage point, why is it that so many people drop the ball when it comes to that aspect of marketing, that repeatable engine side of it?
So I think the thing that I spent years trying to figure out when I was working for large and small startups is there's a lot of tech behind it. And I would say that one thing that AI has accelerated for me personally is my ability to use that tech. Everybody's heard of like low code, no code, and there's platforms that enable that. But at the end of the day, those platforms can be pricey. So then you have to start thinking about, well, where am I going to spend the dollars that I have, which everybody's dollars are limited. So you have to really understand what exactly it is that you're needing and where your brand is at. If it's in an awareness stage, what does that look like from a go-to-market perspective? But if it's a demand generation stage, you have to understand what that looks like. I hear, especially working with early stage founders, there's different go-to-market strategies like blue ocean strategy. Maybe it's a red ocean. Maybe you're operating where there's lots of big fish and you're saying, hey, I'm going to be this little fish in this ocean of big fish. So then you have to think about your ideal customer profile and what does that look like? Who are these big fish not eating? And can you access them? And then the other component of go-to-market is where's my customer and how do I get in front of them? And I would say that's probably one of the most challenging components is who and how.
Hearing you say that, Cristin, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I feel like you reveal one of the things, and trust me, we hear from a lot of listeners worldwide that want marketing answers. And the fact that you just alluded to, there's a red ocean strategy, there's a blue ocean strategy. I mean, there's a million different strategies. We could talk to 100 marketers and get 250 different pieces of advice. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that there is no one answer for go-to-market strategy. There is no one answer for marketing channels. How much of this is experimentation versus, obviously you're introducing us to understanding your customers at that really deep of a level. If anyone's going to have the answers, it's going to be them. What does it look like to formulate a strategy, but then also to test the strategy, then ultimately to arrive at the winning one?
Yeah, so we're all familiar with the term big data, and that became popular in the last decade or so. And I think that a lot of people are not understanding how to use data and create a scientific approach and a scientific system to customers, right? And when we think about it, and I'm just thinking about some of my experience, I did a 2-year stint at Palo Alto Networks, and one of the things that we did is we started with the data and we looked at what was available to us, and we realized that a lot of customers were asking for help with a specific issue, which was software related. And we ended up driving an end of life program that I developed, and it was the first of its kind in the company. Nobody had thought, let's solve this very serious issue for our customers. And I developed a go-to-market program where we digitally enabled customers to upgrade their software. And we ended up impacting close to 100,000 firewalls across 20,000 customers, and saved them lots and lots of money. And so that sometimes is a go-to-market strategy, right? Because now you have shown that you care about your customer, you care about their future state, and we were able to get this program designed and solve a real need because of the data. So you shouldn't create a marketing strategy based off vibes. Let's put it like that. Don't just go off vibes. There's an art and a science to this.
Yeah, so well said. And I love the fact that that's the alternative to it, because a lot of people, that is what they do. They literally throw spaghetti at the wall and think, all right, let's see what shape and size this comes out as. Talk to us about that approach, though, because fortunately, Cristin, we live in a world where not only do we have access to data, but there's so many different ways to make sense of the data. I personally know how much you embrace AI, how much you use AI as a tool to your advantage. Talk to us about how we start to make sense of all of this stuff, and then how it aligns with that overarching strategy that you build.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to talk about a little tool I just built. And I was solving a problem. And one of the things I learned early on when I was going through my own entrepreneurial training, I have an undergrad at from UT Dallas. I have a master's of business administration and executive masters. And one of the things I've learned over the many years is that necessity is the mother of invention. And so the other day I had a need to make sure that I can follow up on all my contacts. I go to all these networking events. But then, I have an iPhone, and Apple's notorious for not letting you access your data outside of the system. But I also have a CRM. And so I wanted to make sure that when I enter a contact in my phone, it ends up into my CRM. And I ended up using AI to develop a system that every evening it goes through my contacts and it syncs with my CRM, and I have to do nothing. And I did the math. It saved me like 40 hours a year. And then not to mention I did it for free. So I didn't use like a Zapier or anything like that with those elements that cost, right? And when you're looking at founders that are really cash strapped, and not only that, they have to show where they've spent their money. If they can use some of these different tools and systems to build things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to, you're already ahead of the curve, right? And so thinking about that, if we think about that in terms of a lead generation tool, because now I'm creating leads that go into my system, then we can look at the background marketing engine that works with those leads, right? And so you have to think about your go-to-market in terms of, how do you resonate with your customer? What's the problem that you're solving? But then how do you fundamentally reach out to them systematically?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I find that when so many people use, just obviously marketing is such a broad term, and everybody thinks about marketing as, okay, I'm going to get traffic and I'm going to capture leads, and that's marketing. But obviously that is merely the beginning of a successful marketing journey. You alluded to that back-end office, that back-end operation that continues to fuel this stuff that ultimately leads to the results. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say that that's probably one of the toughest parts for founders, especially if you're a technical founder, because you might have built the solution, you might have built your product, but that's a whole nother area of expertise, right? Is understanding the marketing engine, because it's broad. It's like a real engine in the sense that there's a lot of different moving parts. And so if you're, we often, marketers look at it from a life cycle perspective. Where is that customer at on their journey? And that is going to determine the outreach that you do to them with them. And so is it going to be educational and informative because they're aware of your brand, they're in the funnel, they know what's going on, but they haven't really gotten to the point that they're convinced that you're the right solution for them fundamentally. So there's an educational component there. And then how do you deliver that education? And that's where some of these systems come in. And now with AI, we've got these incredibly intelligent smart systems that can use all these different things we call signals to identify where that customer is at in that journey. And then you can tailor in a very timely manner, because that's one of the key pillars, is getting in front of your customer when they need you. If you meet with them too late, that's it. They've already gone with your competitor. So if you're too early, they're not ready, and maybe they put these ideas to the wayside and you don't reach out for a while. So a lot of it is time-based. And I think that's where AI can really help us, is make sure that we are in front of our customer at the right time with the right content.
Yeah, it's such a valuable insight, Cristin, especially the way you talk about it. That's why we've been so excited to have you on the air with us, is that when most people talk about AI, it is merely, content creation. I feel like that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to marketing, is everyone will say, give me a 30-day social media calendar, write the post, and then copy and paste. But the way that you're talking about embedding AI as that tool that we should be utilizing it, that's something we don't hear frequently that marketers talk about, is, hey, AI will help you with the timing. AI will help you with the right message at the right time to the right person. Talk to us about the ways that you bake that in, because clearly, and this builds on your last answer about big data as well, clearly you're integrating so many different pieces, including the overarching strategy. What does that look like in practice? Because a lot of listeners are probably going to think, Cristin, I've got a lot of homework. I don't know if I even have the systems to support this.
I'll be honest, the odds are you don't. You probably don't have the systems in place for this. And that's where somebody like me comes in, who has the fundamental knowledge that I've built over the last 15 years of my career, working for, companies like Palo Alto Networks, companies like Fujitsu, but also small startups and medium-sized startups, and then advising to different companies and understanding the real, the real problems at hand, right? And so the developing those systems without the inherent knowledge of a marketer is a very big learning curve. That's, I think, the best way to put it, is it's a very large learning curve. If you're trying to do it independently without any advice from somebody who has the wherewithal, it's a steep hill to climb. It's not impossible, though. You really just have to understand, like going back to the fundamentals at the beginning of the conversation, is where is your customer at? And I would say that you have to pick a single channel and focus on that channel, and run your experimentations through that channel, whether that's experimenting with different messaging, figuring out the different customer niche, right? Different customer targets. But that's where a person like me can come in and help you reduce the cost of this experimentation, because that's what you're sacrificing, is experimentation costs money, costs time, and your competitor can hypothetically get ahead of you in the race, depending on who you're competing against, right? And depending on your strategy. So if you're like a fintech app, there's lots of fintech apps and they're mostly free. So what is your fintech app solving that whatever is out there that's for free today isn't? And how are you going to get in front of them? And that is where you really have to focus on the problem that you're solving. Who are you solving it for? And be very intentional about that. And like you said, don't just throw something at the wall to see what sticks, because first of all, what sticks may not even be like long-term sustainable. That may not be the ideal customer. You might have got a couple lucky people. And so you have to be more systematic and data-driven about it. And that's where some of the AI components and the infrastructure comes in.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about that, Cristin, I think that your vantage point is especially interesting because you've worked with businesses at all different points, at all different stages and all different business models. And so I know that all too frequently when we tune into business podcasts or we watch YouTube videos or we read business books, we convince ourselves, oh, one day I'll have to worry about that. One day I can start figuring this stuff out. What does it look like timing wise? And obviously I always throw that Chinese proverb out while we're on the air about the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. But in the growth cycle, you very much understand the growth cycle of businesses. In the growth cycles that we're all in, what are the different questions we should be asking at those inflection points?
I would say number one, is this working? I think that's a really simple question to ask yourself. Is this working? And what is the evidence that shows that this is working? And like I said in the last scene, did we get lucky a couple times? Is that what has happened here? Or is this a repeatable? Can we target this customer over and over and over, and without fail, we will get traction with that customer? Because then we can say, well, that's our customer base. That's who we need to target. And then from there, as you mature, right? Let's say you get great original traction, and then that traction starts plateauing. Then you have to look at your offering, and then you have to start understanding what exactly is your customer. What are they needing from you in that moment? And that's when you start getting into the differentiation. And we see brands do that all the time. They start differentiating, they start adding solutions, they start adding features, they start doing these different components, because that original traction, maybe they've captured all their early adopters, they've got some of their late adopters. And so that's why I think we look at marketing as more of a life cycle. In an engine, it's always running, it's always going. But as in life, things change, and you have to pivot and adjust whether it's your product, the features, the messaging. And that's where the experimentation comes in at, is the adjustments and the pivots that you have to make. And a good marketer knows how to pivot, but they also know when to pivot. And I don't think this is unique for me, but fail often and fail fast, right? And they tell you that because the longer it takes you to figure out you're going down the wrong path, the more it's going to cost you.
Yeah, so well said. So many important takeaways for all of us. But Cristin, I'm going to continue to throw shade at something you and I have both thrown shade at in today's conversation about the opposite of making smart strategic decisions is, of course, just doing things by vibe. And I love that your step one there was, is this working? Like taking that real life inventory of our businesses, of our marketing, of our customer base, all of that. What sort of metrics do you pay attention to? Because there's a whole wide world of vanity metrics. There's a whole wide world of metrics that matter. Where's your marketer's mind go?
The very first one is, I think, acquisition cost. What does it cost you to get that customer in the door? And that's actually an interesting conversation in and of itself. In one of the, actually working on the customer success side in my career at times, you have to think about what it costs to keep a customer versus what it costs to obtain a customer. And it's actually cheaper to keep her. Right? It's cheaper to keep the customer than it is to get a new one. But when you're starting out, the metric you have is what does it cost? And there's different components that can go into the cost. But at the high level, it's, when you run ads and somebody clicks on your ads and they come into your funnel, what is that costing you? And depending on your digital ad strategy, you can be pretty high. But if you're really targeted, you know who your ICP is, you know the message that will resonate with them, because maybe you've done some smaller tests to see where you're getting traction. You can open that up to a wider audience and dive into the data more. But I would say the cost of acquiring a customer is the North Star.
I love that. Cristin, I really want to zoom out though, because hearing how much you love talking about these things, and obviously any direction we go in, you have so many valuable insights there, but as a fractional CMO, you're working a lot with the CEOs, the founders of so many different types of companies, and I would imagine that they don't particularly enjoy digging into these things as much as you do. They like the results of your work, but when you are in conversation with founders, what do those conversations look like? What are the things that you're realizing, hey, they recognize this is on their radar, versus what are those things that you're saying, I really, it's a little bit of an uphill battle sometimes to get them to pay attention to this, but this is the important stuff. What is it that there's that fight, that push-pull for founders when it comes to all this stuff?
It's funny. I would actually consider myself a challenger seller. And if you're familiar with that methodology of sales, it's really about challenging the status quo, but also understanding what the main problem they have today is, right? Where do you feel like your traction is slipping? And I really go in and have a gossip session about what's happening in the back end for them, or what's not happening, or maybe what their investors are needing from them, because that's often who you're accountable to, is the investors. And so if they're going into Series A, then they need to show the proof of growth and the proof of traction, and they have to have revenue. And they really need to be able to show their return on their marketing investment. And I think that's one of the key things that I bring to the table, is being able to prove at each phase of your marketing funnel, at each phase of your engine, how are you attributing that to the success of the ultimate number, which is your revenue, and how can you show that, hey, because we did this over here, we were able to expand this number over here, and let's attribute that down the line. And I think that's one of the things somebody with a strategic mind frame like myself and the CMO, the fractional CMO mindset, that's really what it's about. It's who are we accountable, what problems are we solving for, and how do we attribute what we've done to that success.
Okay, Cristin, but at the same time, you are not just technical. You are not just taking it from that metrics approach. You obviously bring so much creativity to the table, and that's one thing that I really admire about the way that you operate. Talk to us about that, because those are some of the softer, more intangible things of branding, of storytelling, of designing what our narrative is going to look like, but that ultimately bleeds into all these things that make the metrics possible, that make marketing campaigns successful, so much of that. So talk to us about the softer side of that and how important that is.
Yeah, so I would actually say it starts with empathy for your customer and perspective taking. And I think that's the only way to really get the right message. If I'm my customer, what am I going through? What am I needing? Go in and use the product that you're working with as if you're the customer. What does it look like when I log in? Was there a lot of friction? Did I have to take a couple of extra steps? Was it not very intuitive? Because marketing isn't just about the outbound marketing in order to bring inbound leads, right? It's actually about the customer experience. And if there's a lot of friction in those steps, that impacts your conversion, because they're gonna just kind of exit out. Right? We all know about the lost shopping cart at the end of the checkout, right? And there's a reason, because there was a lot of friction to get that. And, one of the main e-commerce platforms that we know today, they actually became partially famous because of their one-click checkout. That was brilliant. They reduced so much friction in that process just by creating an extra button, that they increased their revenue tremendously. And this was 10 or 15 years ago that they did this. This is not new, but it was innovative at the time, and it impacted every e-commerce website across the globe, right? So thinking about marketing not in terms of just outbound or inbound, it's also about customer experience and lifecycle and reducing that friction.
Yeah, these seem like the fun things to think about, Cristin, that I don't think most business owners carve out the time to think about this. And so I really want to ask you about that ongoing, I often on air, I talk about practice, is that you and I, if we're going to do yoga, we don't do yoga, we practice yoga. And that practice means that we do it consistently over time. And obviously the same is true for marketing, is that my friends who own ad agencies, the thing that drives them the most crazy is when people are like, oh, why would I pay you monthly? Like, just set the campaign up for me and let it run. Obviously, things don't quite work out that way. What does the practice of marketing look like on an ongoing basis? What should we be doing monthly, quarterly, whatever that interval looks like, in order to make sure we keep having a smooth running engine along the way?
Right. So that's a really good point. And I love that. So let's pretend you're a founder, right? Let's be empathetic here. Let's get into the perspective of a founder. You are only one person. You only have so much time. And you can build all the AI agents you want. You do still have to monitor those agents, and you have to make sure they've not gone off the deep end. And I think that's a lot with marketing. If you're a founder and you don't have the marketing expertise, you have maybe the technical expertise, and you understood what your customer wanted, so you built this product, you really need an extension of yourself. And that's where somebody like me comes in, where you can offload that extra work, because again, there's only 24 hours in a day. You're usually, if you're a founder, you're working on founder-led sales, right? So you're focusing on getting the few big fish that are going to come in and show that traction. But that is not the net of marketing, right? The marketing is really about trying to get, more than you could get with a founder-led sales approach, right? And so creating that extension of yourself is fundamental to success, because if you try to eat the elephant all at one time, you're going to choke. And so you're going to find that you have, trying to do everything and be everything, you've actually wasted more money and more time than if you were to get to market quicker through the expertise of somebody that, has spent 15 years working in between customer success and marketing and sales and enablement and, customer lifecycle, than if you do this yourself with the fairly limited knowledge that you can end up having because of your niche expertise.
So well said, especially because, Cristin, you and I joked off the air that I knew somewhere in the conversation we would end up here, and obviously talking about sales and enablement. That's so much of you as a marketer, your work. I've always loved that phrase of, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Obviously, a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, when they talk about marketing, they think to themselves, well, yeah, but I'm not good at sales. I don't know how to convert these people. So this is not your first rodeo, Cristin. You've been doing this type of work for a long time, and I know how much of your past work has focused on sales enablement training. So give us some insights there. Obviously, this episode, we're not going deep in that direction, but I know you've got a lot of value to add there as well.
Yeah, so I actually used to develop improv-enabled enablement sessions where I used, the improv comedy to work with sales teams to help them create more of a fluid approach to their product knowledge, their positioning and messaging, and then how are they using that in real time with customers. And I would use these improv techniques and effectively play improv games with these teams. So that way, at the end of the day, when you're talking to customers, you can't just have your notes and bring your notes out and start talking like you've got, this is not a TED Talk. So it's needing to be more organic. And so through improv, I was able to help people be a little more organic in their interactions and be able to recall the messaging, because improv builds neuroplasticity in the brain. And when we focus that training on the product messaging, on this branding, on all of these fundamental components that you and I might have developed together, right? How do we then take those to market if you have a sales team? Not all founders have sales teams yet that I work with, but when they get them, right? Or even for themselves, especially if you're one of those founders that are hey, I'm actually not that great at sales. Well, improv can help you be more comfortable in that hot seat when you're in it with a potential customer.
That's so cool. I've had many friends who have been improv comedians, just the virtue of living in LA for as long as I did, but I never knew about that neuroplasticity stuff. That's really interesting. And so frequently in business and in life, we talk about the power of reps, is that, hey, the more you keep doing things, your muscles naturally build themselves over time. And you may not see it, you may not feel the results right away. In fact, you may feel a little bit worse the first time you hit the gym and lift some weights, but keep doing it over time and it's going to start strengthening those fibers. And there's so much value in all of this work you do. And Cristin, you bring such a rare blend to the table. It's no surprise to me you've worked with as many cool clients as you have, but I've got to put you on the spot one final time here because I knew time would fly by, and I always ask guests, what's the one piece of advice that you want to leave listeners with today, knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and maybe having marketing engines, maybe saying, what the heck would a marketing engine even look like? Hopefully we've shed some insights there, but as a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
Stay curious. That is how you succeed, is by staying curious. And that actually brings me full circle back to the data component, because like Brian was saying, we can get a lot of data and it can tell us a lot of things. But the more curious you are about the information you're getting from your customers and from your systems, whether they're failing or succeeding, the more you're able to peel back the onion, so to speak, and stay curious and want to know what's under the next layer. Why did this happen? When you get a kind of a funky result, or maybe you had a really good conversion going, all of a sudden it fell off a cliff, what happened? And if you stay as plateau, and you're not like, okay, let's figure out, let's always peel back that layer, you're going to find that you'll be left behind, whether that's you as a leader, whether that's your product and your company. But if you stop being curious and you stop wondering, you stop thinking what's next, right? I had a mentor that was the CTO of Lenovo, and he would say, what's now, what's new, what's next? And I think those are all curious statements. What's now, what's new, what's next? So that's my final piece of advice, is stay curious.
Oh, I love that. And I love those insights from your mentor. That is such a cool line of questioning that even if we ask that of ourselves, there's so much value inside of that. So, Cristin, you've been a wealth of knowledge. This has been an absolute blast hearing the way you think about these things. But I also know that listeners are going to want to check out your work to see all this stuff in action, because clearly you enjoy all different, whatever corner we uncovered here in today's conversation, you met me there and you have so much value to add. So for listeners who want to find your work online and more information about you, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, so they can actually go to gardehaus.marketing, and that's GARDE, and then house, like the German house, HAUS.marketing. And that'll direct you to my personal site, which is CristinPadgett.com, easy enough. So either of those will get you where you're going. And you can also look for more from me coming, because I am building and flying at the same time as many of you entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs are doing, building and flying.
Yes, 100%. And listeners, you already know the drill. We're dropping those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. We're also linking to Cristin's personal LinkedIn. So if you want to reach out to her, continue this conversation, don't be shy. You can get her directly at any of those links down below. Cristin, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me, and I hope I see you soon.